Good evening. So, I've had a couple comments now about Rusty Moore, Rusty James Moore. What's your problem with him? He didn't do anything wrong. Say what he did wrong. What we're looking at here is a notice of a continued hearing that's currently set for December 17th, 2025, and it's a plea hearing. Why are we looking at a plea hearing? Could Rusty Moore be taking a plea? Well, there was a prior plea hearing set for October 15th, 2025. This is an email from the attorney for Rusty Moore. I represent defendant Rusty Moore in this matter. Currently, the matter is set for an in-plea hearing, blah, blah, blah. I need it continued because there was an implied consent hearing that Rusty lost, and the defendant, Rusty, appealed the decision to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, and the Minnesota Court of Appeals affirmed the district court's order sustaining the revocation of defendant's driver's license. Now, when the Minnesota Court of Appeals sustained it, the state and the defense diligently negotiated resolution of the case, as it was unclear whether the defendant would petition for review of the Minnesota Supreme Court of this Court of Appeals decision. Upon defendant's request to strike, but not formally waive the contested omnibus hearing set for September 4th, 2025, defendant stated that these settlement negotiations were going well and that a settlement was likely imminent. What he means by settlement is Rusty is taking a plea deal. They are negotiating on the terms of the plea deal. That's the settlement in a criminal case. However, this settlement was predicated on the implied consent enhancement stemming from the aforementioned order sustaining defendant's driver's license revocation. So, the settlement is predicated on the implied consent enhancement. On September 25th, 2025, defendant submitted his petition for review of the Minnesota Supreme Court of the Court of Appeals order. The Supreme Court has 60 days to determine whether to grant review of this case. Therefore, the implied consent matter, which is vital to the resolution of this case, is not yet finalized, and consequently, the settlement decision, or the settlement agreement in this case, is not yet finalized. Not yet finalized. So there's a couple things to talk about here. First, the Minnesota Supreme Court does not have to do anything on the matter. If they don't respond to the petition, it's denied. They may look at the petition for review and decide not to allow review. They might just say, that's an interesting petition, but we're not going to take it up. So the odds of them getting their case actually reviewed by the Minnesota Supreme Court is low. Low, low, low. The odds of the Minnesota Supreme Court overturning the Court of Appeals decision is even lower. Lower. We're talking somewhere in the slim to none range. Closer to none than it is to slim. But when they're saying the settlement agreement in this case is not yet finalized, what they mean is we have a settlement agreement. We're just not signing it until we hear back from the Minnesota Supreme Court on the implied consent issue. Okay. So we're asking for it to be continued, yada yada. So Rusty Moore is almost certainly going to take a plea. He's already determined he's going to plea, and once the Minnesota Supreme Court rejects his petition, which is very likely, and if they do accept the petition, it's still very likely that the Minnesota Supreme Court will affirm the Court of Appeals decision. So good luck. Rusty Moore is going to get popped for it. He might not do jail time, but he's already lost. I mean, it's all over. The fat lady has sung, but he's still hanging on to a hope and a prayer. Anyway, That's all I got for you tonight. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening.